House of the Dragon has become somewhat difficult to discuss without coming across either too negatively or sounding like I'm ignoring obvious issues or areas where the show could have been better or where the writing maybe does not seem to make a ton of sense. So you're either in one of two categories, unfortunately by default, just by the way people perceive whatever you have to say. So if I say that I think the show, it wasn't great or perfect, but it was good enough, well, maybe I'm just simping for the show creators, for Ryan Condal or HBO or Warner Brothers Discovery, and that's not really the case. But if I express a couple criticisms, or if I feel that, some of the writing maybe was a little bit inconsistent thematically, well, now I'm trying to tear this show apart. So what does that leave us to say objectively? Like, what can we say that will actually gear this into a conversation that makes sense without having to choose sides, which is, ironic that HBO's marketing strategy was that we have to choose sides. So imagine that, like, the fan base has become divided and very polarized. Well, I'm going to try to take an approach here that maybe doesn't win me a whole lot of support either way, but there are problems. And one of the problems that I cannot look past is the way that this season was structured. And a big issue there is when you can confirm that this season had 10 episodes written. That is a fact. There are 10 episodes that were written for season 2, and unfortunately, due to things outside of the control of the showrunners, that season had been reduced down to 8 episodes. And what happened is you have a writer's strike occur at the same time. So the only thing that you can do creatively is try to edit this show in a way that makes it look like it had been organized for 8 episodes. And once you realize that, no, actually the intention was for 10 episodes, it becomes obvious that there was a huge issue with narrowing the plot down to 8 episodes. There's things that just feel like they did not get delivered on. It feels like a setup only for season 3. Where the truth is that there was a climax awaiting us towards the end of season 2 that was ultimately cut. And now that's being pushed into season 3, which can cause a lot of problems for season 3, especially if they reduce episodes again. But they'll have the benefit of rewrites. I don't think people understand how significant rewrites are, because once you start putting your storyboards together and how you're going to film things, and then just the logistics of, we've only got X amount for our budget. We can only afford to film this scene this way. Now, if we want to add anything to it, maybe make it a little bit more layered or more better context, or if we want to reorganize things due to those limitations, how are we going to do that if we are not allowed to write? They made it very clear that during shooting, pens were down, as in there will be no official rewrites. So that shooting script is the same script that they had when they first started filming. So, before they started filming. So when the budgetary cuts come in and they reduce it down to 8 episodes, there's nothing they can do. Now, that creates a huge problem as far as the anticipation or the climax of the season. However, there are a couple issues that have nothing to do with that. And it seems that we can't criticize one without somehow excusing the other and vice versa. But these guys, they were hindered by the reduction in budget, the reduction of episodes. And I think it's important to acknowledge that honestly. However, I see a huge issue, though, with the way things are being characterized. Was House of the Dragon doomed to fail from the beginning? I don't know, but it's starting to seem that the fact that we have anything on screen that's of any substance is actually pretty impressive. I keep going back to the source material in Fire and Blood for the Dance of the Dragons. And you can go back to the Heirs of the Dragons, and it's why season 1 almost just felt like a prologue. And now that we only have 4 seasons, it just feels like we are condensing a story that one of the benefits was adapting the source material from Fire and Blood. It's not very expansive. It's actually very thin material. The way I would describe the Dance of the Dragons as it's presented in Fire and Blood is you've got these significant bullet points throughout the entire story, and it doesn't actually lean in and contextualize anything. Now, like Blood and Cheese is a good example of where George R. R. Martin, the author, jumps in there and, hey, he does create a much more visceral scene. He gives you an image of what that moment was like. But there's not a lot of exploration of those characters after that, other than kind of, I don't want to say passive commentary like on the character Helena, but that's how it reads, because we don't spend a lot of time. There is no point of view characters. There is no in-depth exploration of the character development. It just doesn't happen. I find it fascinating, the people, and myself included, that we went into this with these expectations of who these characters are, when it's like, well, come on. I mean, if you really look at that book, or if you read it honestly, there's not a whole lot to go off of. We've got a list of decisions that these characters have made, but we don't know exactly what the thinking is behind some of these. And I thought that's one of the wonderful things about the show, is that we're going to really be able to contextualize this moment in history in Westeros. And we're getting that a little bit, but because they are kind of going from scratch and they don't really have, they're not able to maintain the blueprint though from Fire and Blood because of just restrictions, the formatting of television, the medium, and adhering to Warner Brothers Discovery, who is giving them limitations, budgetary limitations, and then you have the writer's strikes. So there's certain things that they're being hindered at there. But the decisions with the decisions with Alicent and Rhaenyra, that dynamic, that's a creative decision. That's not a studio decision. That's a creative decision to bring Alicent's age down, or, make her the same age as Rhaenyra, which is not the case in the books. It's really the evil stepmother type of, I guess kind of generic, cliche type of dynamic there between the princess and the queen. So if you go back and you read The Princess and the Queen or Fire and Blood, it's that dynamic. It's evil stepmother versus evil stepdaughter, basically. And, but then they both kind of get sidetracked there after Blood and Cheese, all the way up until, well, what we will see in season 3. I don't want to spoil a whole lot, but once you get into season 3, like, we're going to feel like, okay, we have basically just abandoned a big part of the book material. And a big part of that is they wanted to introduce Helena. I keep saying Helena. She's, in my mind, one of the most disappointing characters when they had her in episode 8, basically realized that she's not just having these premonitions or these unclear visions, and suddenly they make a lot of sense to her and she knows exactly what they mean. I'm not a huge fan of that. I don't know if you are, but I think it is kind of a mistake because you're adding these elements. Look, if you're a fan of Fire and Blood, and I'm a fan to an extent, as it is a companion to the main A Song of Ice and Fire series, but I don't think it's like a great book on its own. These aren't great stories. They're good outlines. They're interesting ideas. Again, the show can like really, flesh that stuff out and expand these stories and make them really interesting. And that's what I thought we were going to get. We're not getting that exactly. I mean, we are. It's just, when now this is with the studio. So if you're following me, and maybe I sound like I'm all over the place, this is unscripted, by the way, if you haven't figured that out by now. But they are trying to expand these ideas, but then also dealing with these limitations from the studio. So it's very difficult to like get these things fleshed out. And then they, maybe they're making bad creative decisions, but I want to see, even if they're not the best decisions with these characters, I want to see those to fulfillment. I want to see exactly what is it you're trying to say. I think it's a big part of it too. We're not spending enough time with some of these other characters like Adam and Alan of Hall, where there's nobody to cheer for. There's not your favorite character is probably not somebody that you connect with and say, this is absolutely the good guy. I think maybe Jace and then Adam and Alan of Hall. But if you're familiar with the source material, it really doesn't center around them. And then, because I always felt like Jon Snow became that person. Jon Snow, or really the Starks in A Song of Ice and Fire. And then later it evolves and you start to really feel, Tyrion was always there as a POV, as somebody you're kind of cheering for. but then Jaime later becomes somebody you're cheering for. Cersei becomes a POV character, but you're not actually cheering for her, but you're getting a better understanding of her perspective, which is, there is utility in that. My issue, though, is once we get to, the later seasons, it does kind of become a more cliched, tropey type of storytelling with Game of Thrones and Jon Snow basically just being your hero. And that's okay. It makes sense, but you don't really have that in Fire and Blood. There is no central character that you're really cheering for. I think a lot of people lean towards the Blacks, and there's a lot of reasons to be sympathetic to their cause. But with the way this show is being presented, spoiler alert. Okay, let's get into some spoilers here just a little bit, or I want to put that alert out there because I don't want anybody to feel spoiled. So this is your warning. Rhaenyra ultimately does start to turn into a more layered character, but in the balance of good and evil, right? She's not all the way good, she's not all the way evil, but she starts making some decisions there towards the end, and her thinking, the way she starts interacting with the conflict, because she's basically idle from Blood and Cheese all the way up until they take King's Landing. So she does start to become vilified. So when that happens, like in Game of Thrones, like say Daenerys becomes vilified. If they took a little bit more time, it's still not my decision. That's not what I would want them to do. But if there's a little bit more time to live in the villainy of Daenerys, right? Say she overtakes King's Landing and it becomes, how is Jon going to overcome this? How is he going to put his personal feelings aside and do what is the best for the realm? That could have been really interesting. And you can still see, even at the worst of Game of Thrones, you can still see that you have a clear idea of who these characters become, who they evolve into. Jon becomes more heroic there towards the end, which, it does seem kind of tropey, but that doesn't make it bad. Daenerys becomes more villainous. Again, not tropey, or kind of tropey, but it doesn't make it bad. And because if she got there in a more organic, slower paced way, it would have been a little bit more enjoyable, I think, for a lot of people, more believable too. Well, with Fire and Blood, we don't have the Jon character. So would it be Daemon? Because now he'd be following a little bit more of a Jaime arc, which in my opinion is far more interesting than Jon Snow. So having him kind of go back to Cersei, I'm not saying that wouldn't happen in the books, but you're cheering for Jaime. I think most people would agree that by the end of Game of Thrones, you are cheering for him and you are disappointed in his decision to go back to Cersei. But if it was something that was given a little bit more time, instead of just a switch that went off from episode 3 of season 8 to episode 4 of season 8 to episode 5 of season 8, if there's a little bit more time there, yeah, I could see him going back to Cersei. I can see him going back to Cersei in the books. And I know a lot of people will think that Jaime is totally done with Cersei. I don't think that's the case. I think there's something there to complete his character arc, or his redemption arc. And ultimately, you have to be confronted with the thing that turned you into a villain to begin with. He shoves Bran from the tower for Cersei. So that's the thing that puts him on this trajectory of, well, yeah, we were a little bit weary of him because Ned Stark had his reservations about him. Other characters have their reservations about him. But what really pushed it over the edge for the audience or for the reader is when he shoves Bran from the tower. Now, in A Feast for Crows, he's going through this exploration of challenging himself. And this is after he had already saved Brienne at Harrenhal. But for A Feast of Crows, what is wrong with me? So in the fourth book, you really spend a little bit more time with him and you get to get into his thinking, and you're watching this character grow. Where, yeah, you had this heroic moment saving Brienne in the third book in the Storm of Swords. By the fourth book, he starts to grow a little bit, and you're starting to see that he is changing. He is trying to become Jaime, the Golden Hand, the Just. He wants to be better. And the only way I think that he can, like, thematically, and I think this is something that George R. R. Martin, if he ever gets this completed, this is not something he's going to just bail on between him and Cersei and just assume that because Jaime threw the letter in the fire when Cersei asked for his help. I don't think he's going to look at that and say, okay, that's done. The Jaime and Cersei thing is completed. I don't think so. I think George writes very nuanced characters, and I think he understands the human condition well enough. And, maybe it's a little bit more of a nihilistic outlook, and maybe he does end up back with Cersei and it doesn't go well. But I think George is going to place Jaime in that position where there is some agency for the character to either, all right, you've learned, you've grown, you've gone from villain to hero. Now you want to be Jaime, Golden Hand the Just. But now here's the confrontation. Now you have that moment where you have to choose. Are you going to go with Cersei, or are you going to serve the realm, or serve a greater purpose than just yourself or what you lust for, what you want? I don't know. I don't know what that decision will be. So could he choose Cersei? He might. Could he choose to go against Cersei? Absolutely. But I believe that there will be that confrontation. There will be that moment, which for me makes him far more interesting than the character Jon Snow. So when I say there's not a Jon Snow in House of the Dragon or in Fire and Blood, in the Dance of Dragons, that Targaryen conflict, the Civil War, there's not a Jon Snow character archetype there. But there is sort of a Jaime archetype there with Daemon. And maybe, and who knows, maybe even with Aemon too. I mean, you think about the idea of the redemption arc. You want to make a character so vilified that there's no way that they can come back from this. And what can be incredibly satisfactory for the audience and really enjoyable is if somehow, some way, like you really push it and you get the reader or you get the audience to kind of revision things, rethink things, re-examine what they thought was for sure. It's not what they know. It's not what we don't know. It's what we know for sure that it just ain't so. So what if we can, Mark Twain, sorry, but it's a very common quote. I'm not profound, but say that you can do that with Aemond or Daemon, or say Rhaenyra does go way dark and somehow she has this moment of redemption towards the end. They're going to change things here. We are not getting the story that we're getting in Fire and Blood. You've got the Alicent and Rhaenyra thing. So I don't know. Like there is a little bit of redemption there with Alicent, but it's inconsistent because of the relationship that she has with Aegon. I think there is some sympathy there for that relationship, and it almost makes Aegon more sympathetic, even though he's the most appalling, or he is absolutely guilty of, sexual assault, violence towards women and stuff like that. I mean, repulsive stuff. So is there a way to make him redeemable there? But with that dynamic between him and Alicent, the idea that she would sacrifice him, that seems very inconsistent. And now I'm finally catching back to where I wanted to go with this, because even with the budgetary issues, even with the reduced source material, I mean, it's almost impossible to imagine this show working out well. And I think it actually has had some really good moments. It has had some good moments, regardless of the limited source material. That's very thin. It's got some great ideas, but it's not very fleshed out. They're doing a good job with a lot of this. They're doing a good job. Season 2, episode 2 is one of the best episodes I think could stack up with any episode of, definitely House of the Dragon. And I think it could go into the category of the first 4 seasons of Game of Thrones. So you do have some really great moments, but then there's these little decisions. There's these little decisions that just, they are small seeds that once they start sprouting into trees or in their leaves and they branches out, and it just kind of seems a little messy to me. And it feels like with only 2 seasons left, are we going to be able to clean all of this stuff up? So again, we don't have the character to counter. Like, say Rhaenyra is the Daenerys of this story, which that's not the case at all in the books. But with the way HBO, I think, has forced the showrunners to make House of the Dragon not just connected to Game of Thrones because it's a prequel, but connected to Game of Thrones as in, we want more of that. Season 7, Season 8, we got some of the best ratings we have ever gotten on any television show. We don't care about what the critics say because they are watching it anyway. You put some ice zombies out there, you throw some dragons out there, you throw some spectacle, CGI stuff out there, people are going to watch. And I think Ryan Condal, Sarah Hess, these people that are come under fire when we feel like the episode doesn't do too well. I think one benefit that or benefit of the doubt that we want to give them is that I think they do understand the nuance of of character development. I think they are trying, but then they also make a couple key mistakes. I think Rhaenys was not handled great. I don't like that she jumped up to the dragon pit in season 1. I think that was a huge mistake because it was never revisited as something that was bad. And even worse, when he says that the people of King's Landing love Meleys. I mean, that's just insane and backwards and makes no sense at all. Like, they just watch Meleys kill hundreds, if not thousands of them at Aegon's coronation. So I don't know. It's almost as if they forgot that happened, or they're trying to gaslight us into thinking that it didn't happen. Maybe it was one of those things where the HBO's like, we want some action here. We want something big here. And as a showrunner or as a writer, if you've worked for like an indie studio, just doing like a group writing project or something like that, you don't get paid a lot of money, but you kind of see the structure. Whoever pays gets the final say. Whoever pays gets the final say. I don't care how prestige Ryan Condal could be or Sarah House. It doesn't matter. If somebody above them at HBO says, our metrics say when we get these spectacle moments, ratings spike for that episode, we get better ratings or we get better viewership. People go back and stream it, rewatch those episodes, they share it with their friends, they chop it up and make shorts out of it on TikTok, whatever. So I would not put it past a studio saying we want more of that. And, the story, narrative structure, all that stuff be damned, because it doesn't really matter. What matters is the bottom line, and whoever pays gets the final say. So at the end of the day, though, Ryan Condal, Sarah Hess, they're gonna own it, because what are they going to do? Criticize their bosses? That's just not how the industry works. You got to get along to go along, or you got to go along to get along. So that's the deal. Maybe they are just making foolish decisions with some of this stuff. The Alicent Rhaenyra stuff, I do not like that at all. I think that it's causing a problem because you're basically having Alicent sacrifice her son, sacrifice the kingdom. And, that would be fine. But I did a video about Ned Stark dying in Game of Thrones in season 1, where it followed the source material very well. The very first book in A Song of Ice and Fire, which is also titled, sort of, A Game of Thrones. So towards the end of that book, Ned Stark dies, and Game of Thrones did something very similar, or not very similar, almost identical. There's a couple little moments that are maybe, I think, a little bit better in some ways. Like, for example, the Baelor, Arya at Baelor and stuff. There's like a little nod that even George R. Martin complimented them for. I'm talking about Dave Benioff and D.B. Weiss. So, I'm not saying you can't make changes, but I don't think that you can have characters die and it means so little in the same season or even a season later. Luke died at the hands of Aemond. Luke died at the hands of Aemond. Jaehaerys died at the hands of Daemon. Or, for all Alicent knows, who knows who's in charge. It was probably Daemon. But either way, it's not like Rhaenyra had exiled Daemon for this. She still wants his support because winning the throne is all that matters. And that's the theme, is that like the seeking out the power is like the worst thing that you can do, because if you focus on that exclusively, well, then all the small folk be damned. And that's the part of the plot that like really needs to start being intertwined into these conflicts, I think, a little bit better, where I think, Hugh the Hammer, Ulf the White, like, yeah, this is good. We're getting to know some of the small folks and understanding that stuff. I would say exploring Hugh Hammer is the most important one as far as making it a little bit more touching. But his daughter dies, right? His daughter dies, and you would be forgiven for missing it because it's not like thrown in your face, and it should be a moment that's thrown in your face. His daughter basically, I don't know if she was sick and died or she starved to death. Either way, it's not really explored too well, so we don't really know, and it seems inconsequential. Where it's got to be, you would think that would be a huge part of his motives moving forward, at least emotional for the character development. And when we want to focus on the small folks, since at the end of the day, the idea is that when the dragons fight and everything, everybody else perishes. I don't know. So making Alicent and Rhaenyra kind of come into this agreement it makes death less consequential. It makes Jaehaerys' death less consequential. It makes Luke's death less consequential. The idea that truce could be formed. And like, what is it saying about Alicent? Like, I don't understand who Alicent is anymore. I don't know what her sons mean to her. Is she just a bad mom? And what was the motive of getting Aegon on the throne to begin with? If you go back to season 1, her motives were clear. She did want Aegon on the throne, but she was willing to tolerate or accept Rhaenyra as queen, at episode 8 of season 1. But then Viserys dies and she mishears him. It's just a big misunderstanding. And, but she thought he essentially named Aegon as his successor. I just feel like you're adding these layers that don't need to be there, because I think that the bullet points in Fire and Blood, I think you've got a phenomenal blueprint that you need to just flesh out. I think there's enough there. I haven't even mentioned removing Nettles. I think that's a huge issue. I didn't think it was at first. I went on to Voice of Old Town, and we talked about removing Nettles from the show. And there might be a chance that a Nettles-like character comes in there, but if you're familiar with the source material, having Daemon's daughter, right, Rhaena Baela, so Rhaena claiming sheep stealer, well, that's Nettles' dragon. And the way she claims her, like, expresses to the audience or expresses to the reader that, no, this isn't, like, forget about legacy, forget about genetics, forget about destiny and all that stuff, forget about prophecy. These characters have agencies. They can will themselves into the future. They can figure out their own path forward, which is a huge problem with House of the Dragon, is that there is no agency if it's all about prophecy and fulfilling that prophecy. Now, it'd be one thing if they're going for, okay, this prophecy, this is exactly what we think, and ultimately the prophecy turns out to be misunderstood or something like that, and it's, I don't know. This is just so much better explored, I think, in the book series, the main book series, A Song of Ice and Fire, and it's not really, this isn't something that's mentioned. This is a show-only thing, and it feels like a show-only thing connecting House of the Dragon to Game of Thrones and prioritizing connecting it to Game of Thrones more so than connecting it to the blueprint laid out for them by George R. R. Martin in Fire and Blood. And that's what I do not like. Before I let you guys go, I want to say, if you guys are interested in some of this behind the scenes studio stuff, I think Dragon Demands does some of the most thorough content as far as exploring that aspect of it, where, like, a channel like mine, I really struggle to dive into that stuff because I really want to focus on narratives. If I can get my hands on these screenplays, or even if I can get my hands on the shooting scripts, or if I can see storyboards, stuff like that, like, that stuff really fascinates me, because just coming from a writer's perspective, that's where I am the most interested. But Dragon Demands, I mean, it is rather comprehensive, his breakdown of some of this information he gathers about basically Warner Brothers Discovery, how that's negatively impacting House of the Dragon, and for me, I mean, it makes me very concerned about a couple other series that are coming up. I'm a big Last of Us fan. I actually thought that the show adaptation was done really well, and now I'm concerned about season 2 for The Last of Us. I'm in the minority. If you're familiar with that game, people did not like the sequel to that game. I thought it was okay. I just thought the structure of it was a little weird, which caused pacing problems. And, that's a common thing for Game of Thrones or House of the Dragon fans to complain about, is pacing issues. So I was excited to see what The Last of Us was going to be, if they could fix some of those pacing issues that we experienced in the game. We'll see. But now I'm nervous. What type of studio influence is going to override creative influence? I'm worried about that. And a big one I'm really worried about is them trying to insist in, like, more CGI heavy, some sort of weird spectacle that would be inserted into the Night of the Seven Kingdoms, or the Dunk and Egg live action TV series that's coming out next year in 2025. I don't want to see that messed with. I'm really worried about that. I don't know how you guys feel. Let me know in the comment sections. What are your guys' expectations here with some of the stuff that I've said? Go check out Dragon Demands and his breakdown of some of these behind the scenes stuff, especially at the top, at the corporate level, with the CEO, what is his name? Dave Zavlov. I don't actually know. Let me see here. I want to make sure I tell you the correct name. Zaslav. There we go. Zaslav. But yeah, he gets into that a lot more. I think that I think this stuff is affecting the creative nature of storytelling, and I think that is unacceptable. And I don't think that we should be quiet about it. If we're going to write reviews, I think that's something that needs to be considered, because otherwise we're just putting it all on Ryan Condal, Sarah Hess, or even Alan Taylor, one of the directors. A lot of people say, oh, where is Miguel Sapochnik? And I wish Miguel Sapochnik was there. Like, I feel like his fingerprints are still on this show as far as his directorial style. But as far as writing, I would recommend that you look at the difference between what Miguel Sapochnik contributed to House of the Dragon and what the people that are still there are contributing, because I think you might be confused about what it is Miguel Sapochnik actually added to this series, because I feel like his fingerprints are still on the series, even if he departed from it. But as far as like creativity, writing creativity, I don't think we're losing out by not having Miguel Sapochnik. As far as visual creativity, that's where I would have been concerned, but this season didn't make me feel that way at all. I think he laid some good groundwork there, and I think we've gotten pretty solid episodes, at least visually. As far as direction, I think it, from a technical standpoint, the show looks pretty good. So I don't know what that, I don't understand that criticism or that concern. I don't think bringing Miguel Sapochnik back or anything like that, I don't think that changes what's happening with the studio, with Warner Brothers Discovery, with HBO. There's a couple other names there that I'm not done talking about House of the Dragon. There's a couple other names there that I think are important to point out, but I want to make sure that I know for certain what I'm talking about when I reference these people that are in charge at HBO before I say anything further. But we'll talk about that here in the future. I'll put links to one of the videos that Dragon Demands put out that I think is really touches on some of the studio issues that I just recently watched a few days ago, and I thought it was very insightful. Hopefully you guys do too. But until then, until I get some more material out, you can check out other House of the Dragon content right here.